Good afternoon. We're going to give everyone a minute or so to get into the Zoom room before we get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Region 10 ESC and Partners Resource Network are happy to welcome you today to our family webinar. Today's topic is ARD Meetings 101, and at this time, I'm going to hand things over to Jim Wright to present for us today. We will be placing a link to the slide deck in the chat so that you will be able to follow along if you would like.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Jim Wright. I'm with Partners Resource Network. I'm the regional coordinator for Region 10. Partners Resource Network, the PAC project, we are a PTI, Parent Training and Information Center. In the IDA law, all states are required to have at least one PTI, and Texas has gotten to be so huge that we are up to 4 in the state of Texas. And we are funded by the Department of Education, and all of our services are free to you, the parents, to help understand your rights and your need and to meet your needs in navigating the special education process. So today we're going to talk about one of those high stressor situations we call the ARD meetings. And hopefully with this information, this will get you a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more confident, and that you can go into the meeting and not be so overwhelmed. So if you have a child that's struggling, he or she is just not being real successful, they're having some behaviors, or they're just a little frustrated. We need to talk to our teachers at school. That's our first line of contact. Our teachers spend the majority of their time with your kiddos during the day. And so we want to make sure we have that line of communication open, and that, to make sure that they're receiving, services that are available to all students. And so when you get into the ARD process, anytime we have a meeting, they're going to give you a notice called the Notice of Procedural Safeguards. They have to be provided at least once a year, first time that you have a initial request for an evaluation, or if there's a complaint from a parent. And
It looks like Jim froze. We're going to give it just a second and see if his internet comes back. Jim, if you can hear me, you might want to turn off your camera. I know sometimes that will help. Okay, if everyone can just hang in there for a second, I think he is trying to log out and log back in.
It seems like I
He's
lost
back.
connection. I don't know if that was
Yes.
so that was on my side.
It looks like it, yeah.
Okay, I apologize for that. My internet didn't seem like it shut down. I believe the last thing I was talking about was, can you see my screen still, or do I need to share screen again?
You'll need to share again.
Okay. Well, while I was saying some very clever things while I was not on screen, take two. All right. So the next step that you will get will be the notice of procedural safeguards. And you will get this when you have initial request for evaluation, anytime you have a complaint, anytime you have any kind of disciplinary or due process situations, or anytime you want to request it. And you can find the notice of procedural safeguards on the website of SpedTex. And I was going to ask Sarah if she could provide a link to that to show the resources of SpedTex and also on how to get this information. But generally, you only need this information when you are in disagreement or you are not sure about situations, and that guides you through on how to um, do that. And I believe our last month we did cover the procedural safeguards, so we have a website that Sarah has that links to how to go through the procedural safeguard.
I'll put that link in the chat as well.
Okay, great. And so your kiddo's struggling and you're just not sure that their needs are being met, you want to refer them for a full individual and initial evaluation. We call that an FIE, or in this case would be FIIE, and therefore afterwards will be FIE. And you have to start learning the secret language of special education. And we have lots of acronyms in special ed. But this can be initiated by the parent, school personnel, or any person involved in the educational care of your student. It cannot happen without your parental consent in writing. That's very important. Also, when you do give your written consent, that's what start timelines for evaluations to be started, to be finished, to get together, to meet again. So that is a critical step on that, is to provide written parental consent. And you want to get it conducted in areas of all suspected disability. And from this point going forward, everything that you need to do, it should be in writing, because it's easy to get confused. There's so much going on with, there's so many students and so many, if you have other children, and when you realize that your child has extra needs, it can be a little bit overwhelming at first. And so I really encourage you to just start getting everything in writing, start maybe even creating a diary until you feel like things are exactly the way that you want them to be. And so here is another special ed name. It's called prior written notice. And to me, this is one of the most confusing terms in the law or special education. It's required when the school proposes or refuses to initiate or change identification, evaluation, educational program, educational placement, and provision of a free, appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE. FAPE is the whole concept of education for schools. Schools are required to provide a free, appropriate public education. That is job number one. And you can get prior written notice anytime they were going to have a change of consent or continuation of special education or related services such as speech, PT, OT, or any other related services that exist. Again, parental consent is a big tenet in the law. They have to obtain this before they do an initial evaluation and before they provide any provision of services. Also, this has to be informed in your native language or form of communication. And SpedTex does have that procedural safeguards that we talked about, and they have it translated into many different languages, which is very helpful. So we get some testing, then we have to figure out what is our eligibility for special education services. There's two requirements. One, you must have a disability, and as a result of that disability, you must need special education services to benefit for education. So just because we identify that, yeah, they do have a disability, there has to be an educational need. And that's a very difficult concept because we have medical needs and then we have educational needs. And a lot of times they cross over, and the need is such that both sides will need to be um, performed to benefit the student. But sometimes it's just it does not meet educational criteria, and that could be they could possibly qualify for a 504, which is a civil rights law, to get accommodations to help the student be more successful. There's a whole nother training on that. And, so they have to, make sure they meet the needs of the student, but how they deliver those services will depend on that evaluation and that need. So the ARD committee meetings, they must be held at least once a year. Generally, we call those the annual. So in those annual meetings, we'll review the IEP, the individual education plan, and determine whether the annual goals are being met and address, any lack of expected progress, any reevaluations. We can go over those. Any new information. Sometimes we change our medicine. Sometimes we get new diagnoses. Sometimes we're doing new therapies or going to psychologists. So we want to share that we're doing at home with the school here, because we need to work together and partner together to meet the needs of the child. And then we have to kind of look at what is this child going to need as they move forward and as things get more difficult. Any kind of special factors, and then any other matters that will come up. So those are all will be covered during this meeting. So who is the membership? The minimum is the parent or parents, and I strongly encourage both parents to show up as much as they can, even if it's by phone call. It does make a difference, and it helps support the person that's in there. At least one regular education teacher, one special education teacher, individual who can interpret evaluation results. For most districts, that tends to be the diagnostician, but not all districts. The individual who represents the district, and sometimes that can be somebody from the district office itself. Usually it's the principal or assistant principal, depends on how that school structures that and who has the experience and time. And then the student when appropriate. Now, I'm going to encourage that you have your students to be there at least for part of the meeting as early as possible. If it can be like as early as third, fourth, fifth grade, to have them sit in to understand that these group of people are coming up with plans to help them be successful. And this is an opportunity for them to share their voice and to understand, how the process works. And that will start teaching self-advocacy skills that they will need when they transition out of the school, because once you turn 18, they're a legal adult and they are responsible for their own education, unless there's, guardianship or other supports available. But again, a whole nother. So generally you want your child to be able to speak for themselves by the time they turn 16, 17, 18 in these matters. It'll make a huge difference when they go transition into the workforce or into secondary, post-secondary education like college or junior college, or I guess I call it community college now, and any type of trade schools. So how does this scheduling work? The school must invite the parents to each ARD committee meeting. They provide written notice 5 school days before the meeting. You want to have a time and place that's agreeable. So if you can't make those times, what I really suggest that you do is that thank you for inviting us. Unfortunately, we can't make this proposed date and time. However, we can meet and give them 3 or 4 different options that you can meet. And so we can kind of negotiate and work together to find a mutually agreeable time. But if you refuse to attend, they will conduct that meeting without you. And I do not recommend you proceeding that way. Uh, we feel that the parent is the best and most knowledgeable advocate for the needs of the child. And so what are our responsibilities? When we develop the IEP, we have to consider the strengths of the students. And this is something that I really want to emphasize. This, you want to identify and figure out, what does your child do well? And we want to make that strength stronger. Take a professional athlete, for instance. Sometimes in their life, they can do one thing really, really, really well to where they're famous and they have a good life and all that. but they have spent a lot of their energy on that strength. And so if you can figure out what the strength of your student, then when they get into adulthood, they can have something that can support them and help them meet their needs. And then the other things we have to consider are your parent concerns. And if you do have concerns, I really encourage you to write them down in what I call an impact statement. Write out your concerns, and then send them to the committee before the meeting. Give them 3 or 4 days to really look at what your concerns are, and that will give them time to prepare, to study, to come up with solutions, and to prepare them for how to communicate and meet your concerns. They really will try hard as long as you give them enough opportunity to do so. Then we're going to look at the results of the most recent evaluation. Then we're going to figure out what the developmental and functional needs of the student are. And here's probably the second most important thing on here is the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, otherwise known as a PLAF. That's another famous acronym, the PLAF. And those are the statements that if you happen to move your child from the school they're at to a different district, a different state, wherever they go, they're going to read that information, and that's how they're going to identify what your child's needs are, identify what their strengths are, and what their needs are. And so it's very important that those reflect your child and they're accurate, and they really, because those are the things that the goals are developed from. So that's your foundation of everything in the IEP. And so going into more of the responsibilities, so we develop measurable annual goals designed to meet students' needs, and we call those SMART goals. We determine necessary accommodations for participation in mandatory state assessments, for the STAR testing. And one thing about the STAR testing that I want to advocate for, the STAR testing is a standardized test, and it's really measuring the effectiveness of the school and how they're delivering the services and raising up the needs of the child. It's not a high stakes test for your child. The school may say it is, but it's because they're being judged, not your child so much. All it is doing for your child is determining where they are and do they need additional assistance. So if your child is struggling on that and they don't pass that, hey, that is data and documentation that your child needs services and more support. Then we're going to identify the supplementary aids and services, related services, and special education services. And then if you have a student with autism, then we go through, in Texas, we have something called the autism supplement. There are 11 areas to consider. Again, a whole nother training. It's like this leads to whole nother trainings. This is the top area of everything. But usually those are baked into most IEPs if they have standardized software and they have check marks on those 11 things. But if your child has autism and they're really struggling, you can utilize those strategies to help make sure that your child's needs are being met. So when we develop the IEP, we decide if the student qualifies for extended school year ESY services. And so that the criteria for that is that do we have a regression of their ability to achieve their goals that they had mastered last semester in a period of time. Now that period of time is sometimes defined by 6 weeks in some districts and 8 weeks in other districts. The law does not say exactly how much time, but it says reasonable. And so that is interpreted in most areas between 6 to 8 weeks. And so if your child is on that borderline, look at their goals that they mastered in May, see where they are after 6 weeks, 8 weeks of school. And if they had not remastered those goals, they have regressed, then that would show eligibility for services for ESY services. Then we're also going to make decisions regarding transition goals and services. That's when they get into the high school to 18 plus age. Make sure that we're going to educate our child in the least restrictive environment, LRE. Again, that's probably the number 2 concept of special education is at least restricted environment, and then decide whether the student has met graduation criteria. So what happens when we get under discipline? And this happens, and I get lots of calls on this topic. The student code of conduct applies to all students with or without disabilities. Okay. So I encourage you, if you have a child that is being served because of perhaps autism, emotional disability, ED, um, anxiety, or ADHD, you need to download these code of conduct and you need to read that to your child. You need to go through that from start to finish because sometimes they'll be encouraged by their friends to violate that school conduct code of conduct. And if they didn't know that was against the rules, they were just trying to make friends because sometimes our students struggle with making friends. They have to, at least we've known they've had the ability to make a choice because they know what the right and wrong choices are. So that's, very important for parents to do. And then limitations may apply to the student with a disability if the school proposes to change the student's placement or remove the student from current placement for more than 10 collective school days during the school year. And so that could be if we have ISS for 3 days here, 3 days there, 2 days here. Once it gets to 10 school days, we have to have a meeting to talk about, the need of the child. And then changing the student's placement, that usually refers to uh, disciplinary alternative education placement or DAP. And we will have a meeting about that. And that meeting is called Manifestation, Determination, and Conduct. So when we do a manifestation determination review or MDR, we address the discipline issue and they'll decide whether we need to have an interim alternative education setting or what we call around here DAP, disciplinary alternative education placement. So IAS is more of a federal guideline and DAP is kind of what the schools around this area use. So it's important to know that those acronyms are pretty much essentially the same thing. So in our dispute resolution, that goes back to that procedural safeguards. When we first talked about that purple document, it talks about all these in detail. What a facilitated IEP is, how you request it, when you do request it, what mediation is, how you request it, what it is. If you want to file a complaint, it tells you where to go to file those complaints. Or if you want to file a due process hearing, that will tell you where the contact information is on how to file those things. Now, the interesting thing to me about how the procedural safeguards are written in all these steps here is that they're designed to create more communication between the parents and the school. And it's because sometimes we get upset or we have emotions involved, and it tries to create a structure that can facilitate communication and start to rebuild that trust to meet the needs of the child, because ultimately that is the most important thing, is meeting the needs of the child, not trying to educate somebody or fix somebody, or you don't have a lot of control over that, but you do have control on trying to figure out how you can meet the needs of your child. And that I really encourage to be the focus of your advocacy efforts. So what do you expect at ARD meetings? You're going to get your introductions and you're going to get your notice of procedural safeguards. We're going to review our assessment data. Again, we're going to determine any eligibility. Go back over that PLAF, make sure that you read that and say, yep, that is my child. That really describes them pretty well. Then we're going to review and develop the IEP, the individual education plan, figure out where is the best place to educate that child. Is it in the general education program? Is it in the resource room? Is it in a self-contained classroom with more supports and staff ratios? Then we're going to do our assurances and we're going to read our minutes, do our closing remarks and signatures. And so one question I get oftentimes is, do I have to sign right there if I'm not sure? If you're not sure and you really want to review that, you have the ability to get a copy of that so you can read through, and you have 5 days to make your determination. So it depends on where you are in that process. I would say out of the 20 years of my child has been in special education. The only 2 times out of that I took the extra days to really read through that, and the rest of the time we were on the same page. It was all good. Sign agreed, and we moved on. But there was a lot of preparation work and communication prior to the meeting to make sure that we were comfortable with that decision. So that is the end of this document. We have additional resources. You can go to our website. Rights Law is a good website. The ta.texas.gov. I guess we need to start adding sped text on here. We haven't updated our things in a while, but I'm going to stop sharing. Is there any questions or anything, Sarah?
Still on mute. It would help if I took myself off of mute before I start talking. We had a couple of questions in the chat, and I did let people know, especially because we're kind of close on time today, that I'd pass along information to you so that you
Okay.
can reach out. I also shared the PRN website as well as the phone number for sped text. And then I was also able to share a couple of links as well. Looks like a
Perfect.
lot of the questions are pretty specific, so those may be something that we want to try to answer kind of off of the recorded webinar. We do thank everyone for being here today. I'm going to drop a couple of more links in the chat. The first one is a flyer for our Building Bridges Symposium. This is an in-person conference that Partners Resource Network and Region 10 host every year. It is being held on October 5th, and it will be held here at the Region 10 building in Richardson. The information is here on this form that I have sent in the chat. It's going to be a great event. We have some speakers that are coming that are going to be talking about some ways to implement positive behavior supports in the home, implementation tips for IEPs, also some information about planning for transition as your kiddos are getting older. And then we're also going to have a topic about self-care for the caregiver. So a really great event. It is free for everyone to attend. We will also be providing lunch at that event. So again, we hope that you are able to join us. Our next webinar is going to be held on October 23rd. I'm also going to place that flyer in the chat. The topic for that webinar is going to be sped text resources. So some of what I shared in the chat today were links to sped text. If that's a website that you're not super familiar with, I invite you to come to this webinar. I'm going to be walking through some of the things that are available on that website for families as well. So again, thank you for being here. We are recording this. After we are able to make this accessible, we will have it on the Region 10 website.
All right. Well, I'm sorry about the disconnect. I haven't had that happen in a long time. And I'm just like Sarah said, I really encourage you to go and join us on October 5th. When we design these and try to pick out our speakers, I kind of do it selfishly, that who do I want to see talk and learn from and grow from to help my children and help me in my parenting skills and advocacy skills, because we put so much emphasis in our children and trying to figure out how we can do that better. And this is a great opportunity. It's free. It's got some great topics, and we just love to see you. And we'll both be there and in person, and not have to worry about streaming abilities. So, please think about signing up and coming out and seeing us.
Fantastic. And before we wrap up today, I am going to ask Ashton to launch a poll. We would love to get your feedback on today's webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, and I did put my contact information in the chat. So if you have a specific question that was not answered, you're welcome to reach out and email me or call me, and we'll try to get you squared away as best we can.
We'll give everybody a few minutes to complete those poll questions before we end the webinar.
Yeah. So who got massive hail at 3 o'clock in the morning last night?
We definitely did at my house. It woke us all up. It was great fun.
Yeah, good old Texas fall and spring.